Today's case will talk about Andrei Chikatilo, a serial killer from Russia who confessed to committing 56 murders in the late 70s, throughout the 80s and in the first year of the 90s. This brutal killer attacked children and young people, adults, men and women. He had no type. He wanted to dominate, sexually abuse and eat parts of his victims. This is the story of Andrei Chikatilo. Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo was born on October 16, 1936, in Yablukne, Ukraine, which was then part of the Soviet Union. He had one sister. For much of his childhood, he was raised by his mother. His father was a soldier in the war. Hunger was prevalent in the region at that time, and the family would often go for days without food. It is believed that he suffered from hydrocephalus at birth, water on the brain. This caused urinary problems such as loss of bladder control, and in his early adult years, the inability to maintain an erection and control ejaculation. As a teenager, Andrei suffered reprisals from the local population because of his father's actions during the war against Germany. His father had been captured and held prisoner. After his release, he was humiliated by his compatriots who claimed that he had allowed himself to be captured. Andrei later became the target of severe bullying at school due to his father's perceived cowardice. Records record that Andrei's first sexual experience was when he attacked his sister's friend while she was sleeping. She woke up and tried to fight him off. This made Andrei stop his attack because he had already reached orgasm in the struggle. As far as we know, his sister never learned of the attack. This experience made him associate sex with violence. In 1960, at the age of 24, Andrei graduated as a telephone engineer. His sister, realizing that her brother was not successful with girls, decided to help him meet a friend who she believed was compatible with him. Her name was Faina. This meeting went well, and they started dating. They later married in '63. Despite their sexual problems and a lack of interest in conventional sex, they managed to have 2 children and lived a seemingly normal family life. In 1971, at 35, Andrei began his career as a teacher. In 1978, he committed his first murder. His first victim was 9-year-old Lena Zakotnova, whom he lured to an abandoned warehouse and attempted to rape her. As he tried to control the struggling child, he stabbed her with a knife, ejaculating as he did, which confirms his psychological connection between violence, sexual gratification, and now death. A 25-year-old man, Alexander Kravchenko, who had a previous conviction for rape, was arrested and confessed to the crime under duress, probably as a result of protracted and brutal interrogation. He was convicted for the murder of Lena Zakotnova and executed in 1984. At work, Andrei's image was tarnished. There were suspicions that he was abusing some of his students. He was fired from the school in 1981, and some months later he found a job as a clerk at a raw materials factory. On September 3, 1981, 17-year-old Larisa Tkachenko became his second victim. She was gagged, strangled, and stabbed. The brutal force gave Andrei a sexual release, and he developed a pattern of attacking and murder. Guys, there is a huge list of victims and several information sources that detail the actions he committed against each of them. I'm going to explain a little about the victims in general. I don't want to belittle any of them, as there were a total of 53 over 14 years. The victims did not have a standard profile. They were men and women of all ages. The records of the 53 victims include 32 females and 21 males, 35 minors, 10 aged 7 to 10 and 25 aged 11 to 17, and 18 adults, 15 aged between 18 and 30, and 3 victims aged over 30. The oldest was 45 years old. Andrei began to befriend people at train stations and bus stops before luring them to nearby wooded areas where he attacked them, raped them, and when I say rape, take into account that the attacker was not using his own penis for the act because he lacked erectile function, so he used his fingers, hands, and sharp objects. Sometimes using pocket knives and kitchen knives, Andrei cut parts of the victims' bodies such as the penis, vagina, breasts, nose, tongue, eyeballs, and ate them. In 1983, more than 5 bodies had been found in Rostov. Others were missing, but no bodies had been found, and their names were not included in this initial count. The Moscow detective, Major Mikhail Fetisov, was transferred to Rostov to take control of the investigation. At the end of 1984, 15 more victims were added to the list, but the police were no closer to finding their attacker. They mounted massive surveillance operations that searched most local parks, bus stations, and train stations. The bodies were always found close to these locations. That year, 84, on September 13th, Andrei was observed by an undercover detective trying to lure young women away from a Rostov bus station. He was detained and arrested. A search of his belongings revealed that he was carrying a knife and a length of rope. On checking his police record, they found that he was under investigation for stealing from a former employer. This gave investigators the right to legally detain him for a period, but this did not last long. He left prison 3 months later, on December 12, 1984. In the following years, Andrei became cautious. Surveillance in the places where he found victims easily was intense. In 85, he murdered only 2 victims. In 86, none. In 87, 3. And in 88, 3 more. I say only because in 84 alone there were 15. In other words, Andrei had already killed 40 people. He began to feel safer, and the numbers started to increase. In 89 there were 5 victims, and in 90 there were 8, because on November 6th, shortly after leaving the scene of his last crime, the murder of 22-year-old Svetlana Korostik, Andrei was spotted by an undercover police officer. The officer watched him approach a well and wash his hands and face. The officer also noticed that his coat had grass and dirt stains on it. To the officer, his behavior was suspicious. Having no formal reason to arrest him, Andrei was not detained, but had his details recorded. When the officer returned to his office, he filed a police report. On November 13th, Svetlana's body was found. The police summoned the officer in charge of surveillance at the nearby station and examined the reports of all the men stopped and questioned over the previous week. The name of Andrei Chikatilo was among these reports, and his name was already familiar to some police officers due to the 1984 incident. By checking with Andrei's current and previous employers, investigators were able to place him in towns and cities at a time when several victims linked to the investigation were killed. Former colleagues from his teaching days informed officers that Andrei was fired from his teaching position due to suspicions that he had sexually assaulted students. The police put Andrei under surveillance. On November 20th, Andrei left home with a bottle of beer, then wandered around the city, approaching children he met along the way. He was arrested by undercover police officers as the suspected serial killer, but he refused to confess to any of the murders. The following day, November 21st, the formal interrogation began, led by Isa Kostoyev. The strategy chosen by the police to obtain a confession was to convince Andrei that he was a very sick man and that he needed psychiatric help. The intention of this strategy was to give him hope that, If he confessed, he would not be tried as an ordinary civilian and would receive more lenient treatment. Throughout the interrogation, he repeatedly denied that he had committed the murders, although he confessed to molesting students during his time as a teacher. On November 29th, police psychiatrist Dr. Alexander Bukhanovsky was asked to assist in the interrogation. Dr. Alexander, under the pretext of trying to understand the mind of a killer from a scientific context, managed to flatter Andrei, and over long hours of conversation, he got him to open up and talk more freely. Andrei Chikatilo confessed to 56 murders, although only 53 of them could be verified. The following day, he was formally accused of the 53 crimes identified. They were committed between 1978 and November 1990. Having been declared fit to stand trial, Andrei went to court on April 14, 1992, and throughout the trial he was kept in an iron cage to protect him from the victim's relatives. The relatives shouted threats and insults during the trial, demanding that the authorities release him so that they could kill him. Each murder was discussed individually, and on several occasions relatives burst into tears as the details were revealed. Some even fainted. Andrei regularly interrupted the trial, exposing himself, singing and refusing to answer questions asked by the judge. On one occasion, he dropped his pants and waved his genitals at those present. He was regularly removed from court for causing disturbances in the trial process. On August 9, 1992, both the prosecution and defense presented their closing arguments to the judge. Andrei tried to interrupt the process and was again removed. On October 15th, Andrei was found guilty of 52 of 53 murders and received a death sentence for each crime. On hearing the verdict, he kicked the bench of the cage and shouted insults. He was offered a final chance to respond to the verdict, but he chose instead to shout insults at all present. Some appeal requests were made between 92 and 94, the last one being on January 4th, 1994. All were denied. On February 14th, Andrei Chikatilo was taken to a room in the prison where he was serving his sentence. He was executed with a single shot to the back of the head.